Thank you very much, Brian. Now for another topic that's been on the minds of Oklahomans for the past year and probably beyond is small meat processing. Our speaker, Dr. Rodney Holcomb, is a professor and holds the Charles B. Browning Endowed Professorship in Food Science and Ag Economics at OSU. His focus is food economics, farm management, rural management, and agribusiness. Holcomb's research centers on agribusiness development, commodity organizations and cooperatives, agribusiness management and marketing, and value-added food and agricultural products business. His appointments at OSU also include extension specialists for food economics. Dr. Holcomb earned his PhD from Texas A&M. Please welcome Dr. Rodney Holcomb.
I think it's on here. Right. Well, when I was first given the opportunity to discuss this topic, I immediately turned around and offered this opportunity to Scott Yates. And Scott's the director of the Food Safety Division at ODAP. And I don't know if you can pick up all of the laugh in an email, but he passed. And then got here today, and there he is. He's sitting right there. And I think he's going to take over with this presentation. Once again, he laughed and said, that's okay. I'll just throw stones at you like everybody else does. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the meat processing industry, focusing on the small Oklahoma meat processors, and specifically talking about slaughter plants, because that seems to be the big issue that everyone wants to talk about. Interestingly enough, in the last year and a half, I've seen this thing pop up a lot of times. I've seen people that honestly should know better in OSU and Oklahoma agriculture put up this meme trying to tell everybody, just go to the local packing plant. Buy a steer, go to the local packing plant. You'll have all the beef you want. In theory, yes, that's how things work. You get with somebody, you buy an animal from a local rancher, take it to a small packing plant, and you pay the rancher, you pay the processor, and pick up the meat. But that didn't work that well during the pandemic. And telling more people to do that was about the same as saying, go stockpile toilet paper. You know, you're just adding to the problem. So theoretically, while it may be true, that wasn't the best response. It wasn't the best thing to do for the industry. It wasn't the best thing to do if you thought you were going to get meat. It just kind of panicked people more when they found out that that small packer that had been booked for 3 to 6 months out was now booked 13 to 16 months out. And then you start thinking about, well, I have to book a kill date for a steer before the steer is born. So the realities of the meat processing industry are a little more complicated than that simplistic internet meme. And I put this up here, this first quote, and, you know, see Michael Kelsey out here in the crowd. I don't want him throwing things at me, but in the livestock industry, we often fluidly interchange the terms cattle producer and beef producer. We don't do that with wheat farmers. Don't call wheat farmers flour producers. Don't call corn farmers high fructose corn syrup producers. But we do that a lot with the livestock industry. And the truth of the matter is, this was a comment that was made in the Congressional Subcommittee report back in the summer. And it wasn't meant to be derogatory, so cattle are not beef. That's not the point. The point is, cattle are one of many inputs. And after listing a bunch of the inputs, the speaker said that the problem is these inputs are always seeking but never finding the perfect balance between one another. It's kind of like an Oklahoma meteorologist that mistakenly uses the term normal temperature when they really mean average temperature, because there's no such thing as normal in Oklahoma. You take what you get and you just kind of see how that plays out every day. It's a totally different day. So the reality is there's a lot of things that go into turning cattle, which is one commodity, into beef products, which are a few hundred different commodities, most of which have very specialized markets. So all those things are concerned. Ironically, trying to find that perfect sweet spot is really tough to do when you're dealing with changing demand. There was about a 7-year span where we dropped 10%, about 20 pounds per capita in our annual meat consumption, meat and poultry consumption. Then the next 7 years, we spent ramping it up to grow by 25 pounds a year. per capita. That's a big change. That's a pretty big switch that you're trying to deal with. The truth of the matter is, Oakland small plants, we're already at max capacity and beyond. Well before COVID came into being, we've had different meetings about that. People say, I can't get my livestock slaughtered. I've got a local niche demand for my livestock, my cattle, my hogs, my sheep, my goats, and I can't find any place that I can get convenient, consistent, and quality slaughter on these animals. And if you wanted to hang those animals for 30 days, you're in real trouble because nobody had enough cold storage space. So we were already running tight before COVID ever happened. And I got to tell you, if you wonder why big plants make money and small plants struggle, economists know this. There are realities in economics. And economics of size and scale are real. So a plant that does 30 head a week versus one that does 30 head a minute versus one that does 30 a second. There are some huge economic differences in terms of how they operate, and we do have to take that into account. When you look at factory concentration, I know that makes the news a lot. We're more concentrated than we've ever been. We're really high, and that's the problem. And all the factories are making all the money. It's kind of true, but not really true. The truth of the matter is, our factory concentration hasn't changed in 30 to 40 years. The late 70s, early 80s, we ramped it up. We hit that 80% four-firm concentration ratio in the meat processing industry, and we just about stayed there. Now, the prices have varied up and down, and I'm sure someone could say, well, look at the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index, and that's going to tell a different story. Yeah, to a degree, it will. It talks about competitive in the marketplace. But we've spent a generation at 80% to 85% concentration in the packaging industry. It's not the only story. I'm not saying it has no impact. I'm saying it's not the only story. There are a lot of things that come into play on what is happening in the meat processing industry today. And when we're talking about the meat processing industry, once again, I want to say we're really talking just about the packing plants and focusing specifically on those. So the big meat processors like Lopez Foods, Advanced Pierre, Tyson, those that are making products from slaughter carcasses, we're not talking about those because everything still comes back to that slaughter industry. So really, we want to talk about the slaughter facilities themselves. You have custom exempt. That's like the internet meat at the beginning. You find that steer, you buy it, you take it to the packing plant, or just have the rancher drop it off there, you go pick up the meat later. It's technically your animal going in and your meat coming out, and it's not for sale. Although you see a lot of people on Facebook and Craigslist that are selling a lot of meat that specifically says on the label that they're showing a picture of, not for sale. There is state inspected, so now we're talking about Scott Yates area, everything that falls under Secretary Offer's purview in terms of food safety. Those state inspected plants that have standards that are equal to or better than USDA Food Safety Inspection Service standards, but they can only be marketed in state for retail or food service. And ironically, when we talk about some of the things that are happening in food safety, I've seen Dan Whitman show up a lot, former USDA Secretary of Ag, show up a lot in the news these days talking about, well, we do need more of these small plants. And I remember back in the late 90s when he was saying, we have HACCP implemented, we're going to make all the state plants do HACCP, just like we're going to make all the federal plants do HACCP. As soon as they do that, we'll change the standards and state plants can shift across state lines. Well, a quarter century later, we're still sitting waiting for that to happen. The federally inspected plants, those are the things we see the USDA plant establishment number on those, and those can be, that meat can be sold retail, food service outlets, anywhere in the country, and you can even export it. And then the Talmadge plants is kind of a partnership agreement. It's a plant that's got a federal establishment number, but the inspector is a state employee instead. So we're not talking about those retail exempt, all those folks that make those nice cuts of meat, sausages and hams and bacons, but they're not doing the slaughter. So if we're really focusing on the slaughter ones, it's been an interesting story to watch what has happened with the industry. There's an old song that I've been in the right place, but it must have been the wrong time. That kind of explains what's happened with the meat slaughter industry in the state of Oklahoma. There was a study that OSU did going back to 1983 when I was a freshman in high school. And Clem Moore was part of that study, and he and I redid some of that in the year 2000, just to kind of see how things have changed. So when you look back at the way things used to be, between 83 and 2000, we lost 30% of all meat processors. Not just slaughter plants, the further processing and the retail exemptions as well. For a variety of reasons, we went to a lot of case-study meat, case-rated meat coming out of the big plants. Well, back up, we had a lot of people that had a lot of deep pockets in times when interest rates were very high, and they came into places where nobody wanted to go, like the Texas Panhandle and Southwest Kansas. They bought huge tracts of land. They coordinated feedlots. They built these great big streamlined packing plants that were very efficient, and they started taking meat down to the case-ready level. We're down to the packaged cut. You don't need a butcher shop in the supermarket anymore. The meat shows up at the supermarket ready to go in the cold storage case. So we had a lot of those plants come in. So it did have an impact. We had acid come into play, and we required that everybody that was going to sell in the retail market to the consumer required they have these very strict food safety standards, and you have a law on unintended consequences. You intended for this to have a big impact on big meat processors, but if it's required of everybody, then obviously it's going to have an impact on the small ones as well. So that played a role. A lot of high costs for renovations and upgrades. If you wanted to upgrade a plant that was built in the 50s, now in the 80s, it's kind of hard to justify bringing all that cost in to do it. You had a lot of people that said, Mom and Dad, grandparents ran this plant. I think I found something better I want to do. So I'm not interested in running this anymore. Like I said, it's stiff competition in the commodity industry. It's very hard once these big plants became very well established. And even back then, it was hard to find good labor. So there we are from the 1980s up to 2000. So we're watching the decline in these small plants. And then what happens at the turn of the century? Huge growth in the local food movement. And we're still looking at it. Courtney Burr was up there a minute ago talking about the things that she's been doing, like with the small producers and the local food movement, because it's still a big thing. It's been going on for more than 20 years. So USDA, Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food. We got people that are interested in local food hubs, food miles become a big thing that people want to talk about. And we have a very fickle consumer base. We went from I want beef or pork or lamb to I want beef that was raised a certain way. I want it to be certified Angus. I want to be raised according to humane standards. I want to be raised on an environmentally sustainable farm. I want to have it all natural. I want it to be organic. When we started doing a wolf reintroduction program in New Mexico and Arizona, there literally came the rise of a certified wolf-friendly beef, which is basically saying our ranch has wolf-friendly predator control practices. We're not going to hurt a wolf. And for some people, that means something they're willing to pay extra for. So all these things came into play. So at the time where we really need more small plants, we had a bunch of them that said we're already out of the game. So it did cause a few issues for us. Now, we have taken steps to try to bring back some of those small plants. And Secretary Arthur was a big part of that. In the past year, using some of the CARES money that came to the state to quickly get $10 million out to new plants and existing plants to help them expand to meet this burgeoning demand for a slaughter capacity in the state. But that's not the only thing that's happened. We have some plants that have been built in the state, some that are being built right now, and some that are on the drawing boards that are tied to the Native American tribes because they got their own share of the CARES Act pie to focus on local food availability and sustainable food programs. So there's money that's coming for that. We're seeing the plans come from that. We've seen a variety of USDA programs just last week, hundreds of millions or more dollars that have been set aside specifically for meat processing with an emphasis on helping the small slaughter plants operate, thrive, even new ones come into the game and compete with the larger ones as well. So we've got a lot of programs that have been put in place to help us have even more plants. If you look at Oklahoma right now, we do have a lot of plants that are coming to play at this moment. And there are more on the books. There are some that are going to be coming to play very, very soon. At the moment, we have 60 custom exempt plants. So these are the ones that you're in going in that your meat coming out. You want that locker beef, you want to go slaughter that show hog and put all that meat in the freezer or split with you between you and your neighbor. We got to see those plants. You can't sell it you can't sell this meat through a supermarket. You can't sell it through food service, but they're there. And we've got 20 state inspected plants under Scott's division. On the federal side, on the Kalamazoo plants that are doing slaughter, not further processing, just doing slaughter. We've got 10. That includes the Robert M. Kerr Food and Ag Product Center right here on campus, a stone's throw away from us. It also includes Panhandle State and Seaboard, where Seaboard's only doing hogs. But we have a couple of Native American plants that are coming as well. The Wawa plant that was built a couple of years ago. And the recently completed plant that the Osage tribe has right outside of Hominy. We know there are a couple more plants that are coming in, Cherokee and Muskogee. I don't have too much details on those. I know at least 2 more tribal plants that have gotten as far as the drawings. And we'll see if those plants come online in the near future as well. But they do. First and foremost, though, we focused on tribal food needs because that was the stipulation with the grant dollars that they received. And we have some farm slaughter trucks that are still out there as well. Most part they're tied to some existing brick and mortar plants because you just need, it's kind of nice to not have to drag the animal to the packing plant and have the mobile slaughter plant come take care of it. But things like breaking down that carcass inside the trailer, I need bandsaws, I need grinders, I need stuffers, I need vacuum packaging machinery. Kind of hard to fill all of that in one trailer. Dr. Terry Partridge, I just used this quote from an email he sent to me a couple of weeks ago. He said it appears that the state will eventually have approximately 14 new inspected plants, 20 new custom plants, including a few that closed within the last 2 years and have been recently reopened. So we are seeing a rise in the number of plants. And just to give you a visual image of what this means, Dr. Whitaker liked to use maps, so I'm going to do the same. I'll throw a few maps out here. If you look at where these 60 custom exempt plants are spread around the state, these little green dots kind of give you an idea. They're fairly well dispersed. On the state inspected side, we don't have any out in the Panhandle, but we do have them for right now. They're kind of dispersed around the state according to where the population centers are. When you start looking at federal inspection, we don't have a lot of them. We do have those 2 out in Panhandle, that's Panhandle State and Seaboard. But you also have the Food and Ag Product Center here in Stillwater. And then everything else except for the Osage plan is really based on the major travel corridors. I-44 and I-35. So when you combine them all and take a look at what all is out there in the state right now, we've got about 9 or so slaughter plants, various sizes, various operating capacities, and various operating protocols around the state at the moment. But there are a lot of issues that come along with building plants right now. As with anything else, the current supply issues impact your ability to go out right now and build a plant. There is an operation called the NISH, Meat Processors Assistance Network. And it's a program that is based at and operated out of Oregon State University. They work with the small meat processors around the country, kind of a nationwide extension program for small meat plants, if you will. A couple of weeks ago, they had a webinar on Rebecca Disselway, the director of that program. So right now, from the survey that they've done, it costs about $450 per square foot to build one of these small plants. That doesn't include any of the movable equipment that goes in that plant. She goes, it'd be at least another $50 per square foot. By movable equipment, I mean things like those band saws and stuffers and grinders and vacuum packaging equipment. We're talking about that $450 a square foot, gets you an empty building with cold storage rooms and wash down floors and floor drains, things like that. But that's about all it gets you. If you want to start right now, you need to plan on minimum $450 a square foot, but you better also add in 2 or 3 years worth of working capital just in case. Even if you could open doors right now, and normally we have delays and backlogs and slaughter orders in Oklahoma, even if you could open the doors right now, you better have 2 or 3 years worth of working capital on hand, just to make sure you can get the bills paid while you're waiting for all the money to really start rolling in. decide you wanted to go mobile. A good mobile unit you picked up right now for the cool sum of $250,000. Maybe. I know someone in town that's building one right now. And he goes, every time we go back and talk about what else needs to be added, this thing gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And he said the trailer is so big, there's so much weight in it right now, I don't think the 1-ton unit was planned to work with can actually do it, especially when you start hanging size of weave up there. So you still need access to fixed facilities if you're going to break down the carcass and store it. The trailers themselves, they do serve a purpose, but definitely not as efficient as a brick and mortar facility. You have high insurance costs. For the big trailers, you're going to need a commercial driver. 99 times out of 100 is not going to be your meat cutter. It's just another paid personnel that you have to have on hand, and you still need access to water and 220 electricity. So more issues, things that need to be considered is when you get to the point where you say, well, that's enough. You know, if you think about ethanol plants, think about the growth of ethanol plants we saw at the beginning of the 21st century. We have so many ethanol plants coming into Iowa, for example. At one point, USDA was saying all the ethanol plants that have been proposed and are on the drawing board are actually built in Iowa. The state of Iowa will become a corn import. I wouldn't be able to grow enough corn for all the ethanol plants. You talk to some of the folks that were operating ethanol plants who say, yep, we walk out the front door of our plant and we're looking at the back door of the neighbor's plant on the other side of the cornfield. And all that corn that's grown between us, we're fighting for every cut of it. Are they going to get it or are we? So for all the programs, state or federal, that we're looking at to support growth in the industry, somewhere in there, we need to be looking at what is the right balance. At what point do we have enough of the small plants so that we don't have people investing life savings in a plant that's going to go belly up in 2 years? Or that we're not going to drive out of existence some of the plants that have been operating for years, but we put 5 competitors right around. So those things need to be concerning. At what point do we say that's not the small plants? Let's look at what we do to bring in a medium or large slaughter plant and see if that fits with the economics of the region. Once again, Dr. Hardage had a great point about this. Because, you know, we saw this big demand and all these plants that were booking a year, year and a half, 2 years out for slaughter dates. That's scaled back a lot. In fact, we're seeing a lot of what we found out is a lot of people are going on all these plants. I've got all these cattle I'm going to get killed. I'm going to book dates at your plant. I'm going to book dates at your plant. I'm going to book dates at your plant. Whichever one had the first open date, that's where they went. So now we're starting to see a lot of cancellations. And Scott and I talked about this today. He had a great point. If we get back to the point where everybody's booked 3 months in advance, that's about right. Because you know you can consistently run, you're going to have a cancellation, but you can consistently run the plant and do a pretty good job with it. The Niche Meat Processors Network said their survey of small plants found out that those folks don't want to put any more money in new plants or plant expansion right now. They're scaling it back. We're starting to see people go back to same eating habits that we had pre-pandemic. So we know there's still going to be a lot more people that want that local meat. They got a taste of it. They kind of like having it there in the freezer when they need it. We know they're going to be around, but we don't see the huge demand for it we saw in 2020. In other words, as any economist knows, you're going to be looking at the long term. You don't totally disregard the short term, but you don't make all your long-term decisions based on short-term conditions. So we are seeing a little scaling back in the pandemic. Biggest thing facing meat plants today is labor. And I think you can go back from the 1980s to present. And maybe this is a research topic we ought to undertake. And Scott, maybe you got some input on this. When oil prices get above $80 a barrel, I believe there is a direct correlation and a negative correlation between labor availability for small meat plants and that oil price. Because as oil and gas take off, there's a lot of people say I can make a lot more money. I may be working hard, but I'm going to be working hard out there where I make more money. And that's a big challenge. We don't have the meat cutter training programs that we used to have. We see some states that are trying to do something along those lines. I've got a couple of shots up here. The one you see on the left, that's from Penn State. The state of Pennsylvania has instituted a program through Penn State where you get 4 months of on-campus training at Penn State's butcher shop. 4 months of on-campus training for meat cutting, all aspects of meat cutting. And you're paid some for all that time you spend there. Then there's a 2-year internship program where you go work in a small meat plant in the state of Pennsylvania. And the state of Pennsylvania picks up part of the tab of your costs. So you got 2 years and 4 months in. When you come out, you train, you got the experience. So that's an interesting approach. University of Kentucky has put together some programs where you come in and do multiple 2- and 3-day meat cutting programs. You want to be a meat cutter, you come in and do this. The big challenge, I've talked to some people from some packing plants, I've talked to some people from Career Tech. I know Career Tech is looking at a training program like that. One of the big challenges is that you get people, unless you have something like Pennsylvania, where you're subsidizing a program, can you really get people to commit to a 2-year training program that they're paying for out of their pocket? And then when they finish, they get $15, $20 an hour as a meat cutter. That's a big challenge. Because I go through Career Tech now in plumbing or electrical work, do a 2-year program and come out making $30 or $40 an hour or $50. So labor is a big challenge. And I should add, it's not just meat cutter labor we're concerned with. With all these plants coming online, especially those that are state and federal inspected, where are we getting inspectors? Where are they going to come from? So we've got people that need to be trained just to be the meat inspectors, these plants as well. So we do have slaughter plants. We have growth in the number of slaughter plants. This state is supporting that industry in a big way because it's a big part of who we are and what we do. We've always had a vital small meat processing industry. We still have a strong demand for that local grown, local sourced meat. And we still have some challenges. As the speaker from Rattlebank told Congress back in the summer, we're still living in that sweet spot. We can't get all the inputs and the demand, everything to come together all at one time. And there we are. But that's the nature of agriculture. We always hope for the best and we take whatever we get. So I've got one more slide here and it says questions. Oh, no, I did have one more slide for questions. This was going back to that comparison again. I threw this slide in to show how some of these issues have changed over time. So if you look at the 1983 study that OSU did compared to the 2000 study that Fillmore and IPA. Once again, this was 20 years ago. You're looking at the top 10 concerns of these small meat packers in the state of Oklahoma. Availability of competent, reliable labor, that was number 1 in 2000. Because oil had taken back up with a lot of new drilling rigs in the state, and people were losing labor left and right. In 1983, that wasn't a concern at all. It made number 9 out of 10. The rest of it, the cost of doing business, renovations and construction and utilities and all that, that was still there. The labor wasn't that big of a deal. It's not a matter of high prices for livestock or meat. That wasn't a big thing then. It's just, can we get all the inputs that we need to turn livestock into meat products? And labor was a big deal 20 years ago, but labor still is. So this next question says questions. I meant to put under that. If you have any, ask stuff. Got a second for a question or two before we turn it over? Scott, I thoroughly confused everyone. That's good. You did a great job. Thank you very much.